Today, I want to look at a rare mythic pattern. It definitely exists, but it is not nearly as common as many of the other kinds of tropes or narratives that we see across different cultural mythologies. Most mythological gods have bad things happen to them. They can fail and fall and fight and lose. They can even die and or be replaced. But very few choose to leave. That's what we're talking about today. Gods that gave up. Gods that withdraw, that abandon or abdicate their thrones, that step back from the world. And again, not because they were defeated, but because they made the choice. They decided something to the effect of the world or their creation was no longer worth ruling or saving or staying for. And I think that's fascinating. When a god leaves, what does that mean? We understand what it's like as humans to fail and to quit. But when the gods do it, man, that can open up some pretty unsettling questions. What does that mean for the universe at large? What happens to meaning and authority and morals if the entity responsible for those things just up and leaves? What does it say about us, humanity, the created, if even the gods lose patience with us or hope for us? I actually think the God giving up narrative is one of the most interesting for these reasons, because it seems to be almost the saddest or most nihilistic depiction of what humans think about themselves. We're not worth it. We were too much, or we were not enough. What does that say about responsibility for us? So this isn't meant to be a long episode. We're not going to focus really deep on just one god. Sometimes we do that. Sometimes we do some comparisons. This one's going to be more on the comparison side. I think I'm going to show you 10 different gods that chose to leave. I'll give you some quick context on who they are, what they're responsible for, what their backstory is, where they came from, and why they left. We won't get too much more into the weeds other than that. Let me know which of these 10 you are most curious about, and that way for one of our next deep dives into a particular mythology, I'll know what to address. Let's start with a story from Mesoamerica, and we'll be talking about Quetzalcoatl, whose name means something like resplendent feather serpent. So it's a feather serpent deity and kind of a cultural hero. You can find this story in both the Toltec and the Aztec storytelling. Of course, there's going to be some regional variations there. This entity is responsible for wind and kingship and learning and priesthood. And the short story about his leaving is that through a mixture of being tricked and intoxicated, as well as some moral compromising, he ends up violating his own ideals, his own set standards. And rather than rule dishonesty in his own hypocrisy, he chooses self-exile out of shame. All we know is that he relinquishes power and heads eastward. Truly no external pressure here. One of the rare stories where a god leaves totally out of personal failure. And the myth doesn't stop there. There are so many interesting things with the culture that is awaiting his return. But most importantly, what's so fascinating here is this divine authority is portrayed as something that can be taken away, something that one can revoke via conscience alone. I already feel like I've made a mistake. I just want to talk about this one particular myth because it's not even a fallen god. It's just a god that refuses to rule corrupted, maybe making that entity more godlike than most gods that we've ever come up with. Let's move to the Akan god Nyame. Nyame is the supreme sky deity, and the Akan people are the people of West Africa. This is the god of creation, of order, of all authority. But those darn humans, they grow awfully intrusive and demanding and quite disrespectful. Nyame responds with distance, just retreating higher into the sky. And so far as I understand the framing, because we see this in some of the Abrahamic characteristics, this isn't necessarily to punish as it is relational. The sacred remains, it's just a bit more unreachable. If you guys were having such a problem with me, fine. I don't have to be here as much. Yes seems a bit passive aggressive, but at the same time, it seems to be an olive branch of when you're ready for me, though, I come back. So it's not even disbelief, which is what we see in some other mythic versions of this kind of trope, where the lack of faith, lack of belief is affecting the god's ability to be present. Now, these people believe, it's just their poor behavior that is causing separation. He leaves because the closeness he tried to offer fails. So interesting. Again, I wish I could give you more for each of these, but if we're going to get through this many, I want to keep moving. But look out for the differences, however slight or large, and then the similarities in these gods that gave up. The Nigerian people have a god, Olodumare. He is supreme being, the very source of being, the ultimate authority. And his leaving, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to include because it's almost boring, but it's a delegation. He remains supreme, but he withdraws from daily involvement. He gives over that day-to-day reign to the Orishas, these divine spirits. I guess you could think of them as angels, for lack of a better term, just to help you understand kind of the hierarchy and the order. Imagine if in the Christian tradition, after Yahweh created the earth in some time in the garden, he stepped away and said, okay, archangels take over. So this is an intentional move. It seems like this was always going to be the case. This isn't because of failure or shame or how the people are reacting. This is just good governance. It is a added structure and layer to the world and how it will be ruled. A withdrawal by design. Next, I want to move to one of my favorite deities in all mythology. It is the Japanese sun goddess Amaterasu. This is the central kami of Shinto. She's known for her harmony and purity, balance, and imperial legitimacy. And there's a couple of different things that work up to her leaving, depending again on the variation. But there's prolonged conflict and desecration, especially through Susuno's actions. And so Amaterasu chooses to withdraw. She hides herself in the heavenly rock cave. And unlike some of our other stories so far, the result here is horrendous and immediate. Think about it. This is her representing the sun, which is what the source of life. So the sun refusing to shine is a catastrophic event. It's darkness, it's chaos, it is the breakdown of order. Her withdrawal is emotional and also a moral position of withdrawal and also cosmic all at the same time. Really kind of the three layers that a god interacts in anything at all. The other gods cannot force her return. All they can do is try to entice her. And so they perform ritual and try to restore balance this way. The myth teaches that divine presence is conditional. It is not guaranteed. It is not somebody else's right. This is a god who leaves because the world became unlivable. Let's go to Egypt and look at Ra. And I covered this one in a previous episode, so I'm going to be really brief here. But while we're talking about sun deities, again, we have Ra, solar creator god and ruler of the cosmos. This is the creator, the judge, the guarantor of Ma'at, cosmic order. But humanity rebels. They conspire. They become truly violent. At first, Ra responds with punishment, but crucially, not constant supervision. And so after order is reasserted, Ra withdraws from direct earth involvement in leadership. And this is when he ascends permanently to the heavens. And this is really, I think, just trying to bridge the gap between different time periods of Egyptian mythology. Earlier Egyptian myths pictures the gods walking with humans. In fact, this is another very common trope where gods start very personal and intimate. They're at creation, walking around with their creation. But then it's like, as you try to catch up to the modern world, whenever it is being recorded or written or spoken about, and people are obviously not seeing gods walking around, they have to explain, well, if it started like that and we're here now, what happened? And so it's not always a god that chooses to leave, but that is an answer that gets put into this section. It's simply an explanation for the divine hiddenness of the sun god, for the reason that there is suffering on earth. Yes, the world still runs on order, but it's not fair. Divine authority remains real, but it's remote. Now you're going through kings and priests and ritual. He just simply stopped intervening, fed up, tired of it all. But we'll jump just across the street to Mesopotamia and talk about Enlil. This is the god of wind, of authority, of command. So this is going to be Sumerian and Akkadian mythology. And Enlil becomes increasingly frustrated with humanity, which in and of itself is another hilarious trope within so many different cultural mythologies. These much bigger, much more powerful, much sometimes wiser entities that have been around longer and can do so much more than we can. They choose to make us and then always are disappointed or frustrated that we are not enough. Again, I think that says so much about how humanity views itself. But if we were really trying to take any of these mythologies seriously, it actually just looks really bad on the more powerful deity. No one forced you to make anybody. And not only that, but they didn't force you in how to make them. This is just your own failure if you don't like what you got, if you're frustrated or annoyed. But humanity has gotten too loud, too numerous, too annoying and disruptive. And this one doesn't fit as well as some of the others, because at first he tries a series of catastrophes, and again we get to the flood narrative, and so he kind of settles for a restructuring of the world that allows for his reduced involvement. So kind of created his own boundaries after his attempts to destroy it did not quite turn out. Essentially, he just gave up on the administrative side of being a god. Jumping forward to Babylon, we can talk about Marduk. This is the national god of Babylon. We read about him in the Enuma Elish, god of kingship and empire and cosmic order. Now we have another trope being introduced here. His territory, Babylon, falls. It is understood that Marduk has removed his presence. His absence is there to mirror political and moral failure, not necessarily defeat. The gods in Mesopotamia were traditionally tied to individual cities. And so as those cities grew or fell or changed, so too did the god. But the framing, the way that you read that when a city falls, is that the god's departure is read as a resignation. They're not losing power. This wasn't a blemish on them, so to speak. It's just what happens when a god pulls away, or sometimes the idea that a god pulls away because the city is going down. And then you can have returns as well, and we see this ebb and flow. The return, obviously, when things are on the uptick during times of restoration or conquering. We'll talk about the Bantu people with Mulungu. Mulungu is a creator deity, also the arbiter of morality. He too is starting to get a bit fed up with humanity. They are misusing their gifts, specifically in this narrative, and some are violating boundaries. Mulungu, who had been having direct communication with his creation, ascends to the skies. The world just continues on its own terms. Suffering then becomes a consequence of autonomy. This has nothing to do with the abandonment. This is just what is left. This is what becomes natural. And again, it is just that kind of myth that answers the divine hiddenness and problems of suffering. Well, yeah, we used to have a god who would have prevented that, but that god has stepped back. We're left to our own devices, and this is what we get. And in general, sometimes you can read this too, and in a lot of these tropes is just like post-creation withdrawal. Like this was always going to be the case, that gods set things up, they put them in motion, they stick around for a little while just to get the ball rolling, to make sure the rules are clear. Except so many of the myths show an emotional side of the god becoming disillusioned, displeased, frustrated, annoyed, or just straight up disappointed in their creation. And so that's why they leave. But we'll move on to our ninth one, which I think is a really good example of just that. Hey, my job was to create and get things going. I'm a teacher and now I'm out. Introducing the Aboriginal deity Baiame or Baiame, depending. This is a creator and teacher figure. We see them introduced in multiple Aboriginal traditions. They are associated with law and moral order and ceremony or ritual. And Baiame does just that, creates and establishes law and ceremony and leaves. Humans are who are responsible for maintaining this order that has been bestowed to them. But that bestowing is now over. You're on your own. The departure is planned from the beginning. It is not emotional. It is not a reaction. There's nothing that could have prevented it. Now it's up to the people, the culture, to replace that divine command. I actually really like this concept. Kind of get to have your cake and eat it too. You get all the big explanations to where did we come from? Why are we here? There must be something larger or greater out there. But then you actually get free will and autonomy, and you don't blame the successes or the punishments on gods or demons. It's just you. It increases responsibility while still allowing for the spiritual. And it's seen as a trust-based withdrawal. This isn't even just, I did my part, good luck. It is, I did my part so well. I have created you. I have given you order and ceremony and what you need. You can do this. Again, such a unique and cool concept within the different ways that we've seen this show itself. And so for our last one, we'll just stick with something that is more familiar. We'll talk about Yahweh, of the Israelite tradition of the Hebrew Bible, a God of holiness and creation and order and morality. And take your pick, because we actually have Yahweh leaving in a few different ways, and he's really emblematic of, and we kind of saw this with Marduk as well, the god who withdraws his presence, usually as punishment, and also to correlate or correspond with the times when his people are captured or defeated. But when his people are doing the capturing or the defeating, it is because he is with them. His presence is conditional upon their obedience, and his presence or lack thereof works as a blessing and or a curse. We see this all over the ancient Near East at this time. And there's a more technical term for all of this in terms of anthropology. It's like a temple leaving presence. But that's how common this particular trope is at this time. This god becomes less visible, becomes more abstract. That's why we get where it's now about the spirit. That's what's left on earth. This God has retreated where he once left footprints, where he once inhabited the temple in a physical way, guided his people, met with them on mountaintops, walked with them in gardens. No, he has ascended to the skies, again, just like we see with so many others, but he leaves a part of himself. And that's even later. That's past what we're talking about here, which is the Old Testament departure from the chosen people group at times for disobedience. So again, a few iterations of how we see this God change and leave in response to things in different times. I'd like to give you just a quick kind of closeout section here of what we can learn from this, or what we should be thinking about. These gods leave when intimacy breaks down, when their authority loses legitimacy, when their governance becomes unsustainable, or when their creation is meant to stand on its own, or when there's some kind of moral failure or uprising, or sometimes just due to petty annoyance. The interesting thing in every single one of these that we covered is when the gods leave, the world doesn't end. Sometimes it gets worse, but considering how many of these are true creator gods, the fact that their absence doesn't immediately create the absence, I think is just interesting. And I'd love to hear your guys' interpretations of that. And in all of their leavings, when they do, they force a shift. Morality has to happen on your own. It cannot rely on rescue. Meaning can't depend on their physical presence any longer. Responsibility can no longer be outsourced upward. And in this kind of thinking, no matter the reason or motive that these gods left, it's almost just like a natural maturing, thinking of a child becoming a teen, becoming an adult. Yes, at the infancy of the world, the gods are so there and hands-on. And then through the chaotic puberty section, there's tension, strife, and argument. And those hard moments where the parent, in this case the god, has to pull away to let that maturity come to true fruition. Now it's painted with a broad brush and a little bit naively optimistic, as many of these gods were not allowing for that or creating punishment along the way that hurt that end cause. But still, I think there's something there. A mature world is the one where the gods are distant, right? I mean, I think that's a fair statement to make. And if you follow it all the way to its end logical conclusion, once we have no need for gods at all, once they completely disappear, once all of them have stepped away in full, and we realize how truly alone we are here, is that the height of moral maturity. Myths are incredibly deep. I think sometimes it's easy to just say, oh, it's just what people came up with. They were passing time, they were telling stories. And I just don't believe that. I think you see too many layers. You see too many cultural similarities where these ideas are being told out in narrative to convey something larger, something innate within humans in general. And in this particular case, it seems to be a recognition that we needed concept of a god at the beginning. We need a base to explain our naivety. But as we mature, as we grow, as we learn, we become less dependent. And maybe, just maybe, there's something great waiting for us when we can fully let go. I don't know, just my interpretation. Either way, I see it as a call to autonomy, to creating beauty, to our own responsibility, to us getting to be the arbiter of meaning. When the gods walked away, they didn't take the world with them. It's still ours. We are now responsible for it. We are now the stewards of creation. It's unfinished. It's vulnerable, but it's ours. What are we going to do with it? I hope that this was interesting to you. I hope that you learned about some new myths, even however brief and high level. Until Wednesday when we do it again, keep sharing. An unbelievable shout out to our first Inferno patron, Laurie. Thank you for the wonderful generosity. Also to our Blaze tier patrons, Decox, Dark Side of Delight Productions, James Geider, and Noëldivergent, as well as all of our Flame tier patrons that you can see on the screen. All other patrons are Ember tiered and are listed in the description of each video. A sincere thank you to each one of you who allows me to continue to share this fire.